DrugsCo class. Let's get to it. This is it, you guys. All right. This is the cutest chat ever. All right, so last we talked about was 4-fluoroamphetamine, or 4-FA, which is a potent central. Oh, look how wet my hair is. It's because I got squirted with rubber duck water. 4-fluoroamphetamine is a potent central nervous system stimulant with some empathogenic and tactogenic qualities to it. And the last thing that we talked about was the fact that, yeah, I'm sorry, I made to rub it in. Last thing that we talked about was the fact that a study on 4-FA was actually stopped early because of the dangerously high spikes in blood pressure that were leading to potential cerebral hemorrhaging, or brain hemorrhaging, brain bleeding, basically. We don't know exactly what's going on with 4-FA that it does this, but this is something to be aware of if you or your circles use 4-FA. As I said last time, please be very mindful of the fact that it's experiencing a severe headache or other cardiovascular or blood pressure issues is not normal. So be wary of this. I do not recommend exceeding a dosage of 150 milligrams. That is the max. That is what they used here. That was way too high and caused significant blood pressure spikes. You can see here how much higher the blood pressure spiking was with the 150 milligram dose than the 100 milligram dose, which is the black line. So be careful with 4-FA. Now, looking at Kava, I'm sure that many of you have at least been kind of exposed to this peripherally, or perhaps even drank it before. I will personally say that I cannot. It is so bitter. Oh my God, it is so bitter. But there are actually legal Kava lounges at various areas in the United States. I've been to one in San Diego, one in San Francisco. I'm sure that there are more, obviously. But Kava is a GABA agonist, a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, and a CB1 agonist. So that's an interesting combination, right? We haven't really seen something like this that is also a cannabinoid agonist, which is really cool. So just looking at this effects profile, we can immediately see that because it's a GABA agonist, it's sedating. It increases the effectiveness of GABA, which is a depressant neurotransmitter, basically. It is mood enhancing because it is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which means that it prevents norepinephrine from getting recycled, so it's doing its job more effectively. So your arousal, your alertness is raised. And it's a CB1 agonist, which is a calming kind of sensation as well. Now, this is a traditional drink in the Pacific Islands, and oftentimes it's made just by grinding or chewing up the roots and the leaves of the kava plant. It's known as grog sometimes, and it has kind of a numbing quality, almost like cloves do. Kava can backfire and cause worse anxiety. This is true, and does anyone have an idea of why kava might cause anxiety in some people? Just looking at its neurological profile, any guesses for this? What about these neurotransmitter effects might cause anxiety? Just take a guess, you got this. Yes, norepinephrine, that's right. Exactly. So norepinephrine is your fight or flight neurotransmitter, right? And GABA is your depressant or relaxation or anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. And CB1 receptors usually are involved or implicated in anti-anxiety as well. So it would make sense that if you're increasing norepinephrine activity, there would be an increase in anxiety concurrently. We see it as getting drunk, but it really just numbs your tongue. Definitely numbs your tongue, and if you drink enough of it, you can become intoxicated, but you do generally, I would say, have to drink a little more of it than people think. Now, there are two general kinds of kava. There's noble kava and non-noble kava, otherwise known as peasant kava, but only to me. No one actually says that. So noble kava is what is traditionally we drank enough of it. What is traditionally consumed, and this is like the original cultivated kind of kava, whereas non-noble kava, or 2-day, because of 2-day long hangover effects, which sucks, is easier to get, easier to grow and maintain and harvest, but a lot harder on the body. So in terms of like the actual effects of kava that you want to seek out, if you go to a kava bar or if you order and try and make or ingest kava, you should always ask, is this noble or non-noble kava? Because if it's non-noble, you're at serious risk of having a pretty profound hangover as a result, which sucks. And if they say that it's noble kava, then you can ask for specific information about it if you are so inclined. There have been studies that have shown that using kava regularly and or in high doses can lead to liver toxicity and skin problems. And this is kind of similar to alcohol. It's a depressant, right? Like it's a GABA agonist, and oftentimes depressants will lead to liver complications. In fact, many, many drugs lead to liver complications, and kava is no exception from this. That's not relevant. That's the end of that lecture from last time. Bada bing, we almost finished an entire lecture in one thing. And now, actually there are some disclaimers in this lecture, so we won't get there yet. But before we do that, what exactly does music do in the brain when played for people that are on LSD? There's a specific thing that happens. Does anyone remember what it is? Guesses are fine, as always. Enhances memory formation. That's like kind of it. You know, you're in the right realm here. Yes, exactly. Connection to memories. So usually when you're on LSD and you're looking at your environment, there's a disruption between your hippocampus, which is your memory storage and personal autobiographical information storage, and your occipital cortex, your visual cortex, which is what takes in information and processes it and understands where it comes from and how it relates to other things. Now, that's usually disrupted under the influence of LSD, but there have been studies that have shown that when you add music into the mix, instead of being disrupted, it's actually enhanced. So this allows you to attribute new meaning not only to situations and people and places and things, but also to the music that you're hearing, for instance. And this is part of the power of cultivating a playlist for psychedelics, which a lot of researchers have been looking into. About how long do ketamine's antidepressant effects last? Approximately.
About a week.
Very close. It's actually a little more than a week. It's about 10 to 14 days, but you're in the right ballpark. What are the two varieties of kava? Oh, this is unfair. Which can cause discomfort if ingested? You guys remember?
Non-noble.
Noble and peasant, I see.
Oh,
Noble and
peasant.
peasant.
Okay.
Well, no, that's just what someone said in the chat, but it is non-noble and noble, but I love calling it peasant kava. I think that's hilarious. But yes, noble and non-noble kava are the two general varietals, and which can cause discomfort and hangovers. Noble or non-noble?
Pheasants. Birds aren't real anyway, so never trust them.
So non-noble kava can cause, only peasants get hangovers. Jeez. All right, so a caution for today. Yeah, birds aren't real. They're actually government spies, and they're 5G transmitters. Be careful, people. It's rough out there. So major caution for today, major content warning on this entire lecture. This is very graphic. There involve mentions of body gore, children ingesting drugs is a major part of this, injection sites. This is a very graphic lecture. So be prepared and feel free to duck out if you need to, but just be aware that this is a pretty comprehensive content warning. First thing that we're going to be looking at is chemsex, otherwise known as party in play. As someone who has tried to grow plants, I will never use the term peasant as an insult ever again. Yeah, I've killed a couple succulents. So the term chemsex or party in play is used particularly in gay communities, like specifically AMAB or assigned male at birth communities. And it is both a way of enhancing sex and also fostering connections between people. There's a really great guide, the A to Z of chemsex, that is linked in these slides if anyone's curious about this. But generally speaking, the drugs that are used during chemsex are for enhancing erectile function and preventing ejaculation so you last longer, increasing stamina so you last longer, and decreasing inhibitions. Now, this thing about increasing stamina for days at a time is a pretty major talking point here. And we'll get back to that in a second. So oftentimes, chemsex communities are primarily about creating connections between people, and this can be because of a whole bunch of different things. Generally, hookup platforms like Grindr are disproportionately used for pushing substances, particularly those that are used in these communities, which means that these already marginalized communities of gay individuals are further disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, basically, because not only are they already part of marginalized and therefore oppressed communities, but also adding substances into the mix without adequate testing facilities and education means that they are even more at risk as a demographic as a whole. So this really contributes to a cycle of marginalized groups having increased access to substances, but less access to either resources that would change the context around their use or resources that would help them improve the safety of their use. So that's a really big issue. Now, in a lot of cases, the reason that this can be such a big mental health problem is because, like, being gay in general in the world comes with its own set of potential issues, like loneliness and isolation and the risk of HIV and AIDS and the risk of internalized homophobia. And internalized homophobia is actually a really big one here because a lot of people in gay communities have been raised in environments where it's not okay to be gay. And because of this, entering into kind of secret spaces for sex and drug consumption can be a lot more prevalent because it's kind of this underground thing that goes away when the sun comes up. So let's talk about the drugs. Now, two of the most prominent ones in these communities are meth and coke. And in this specific context, Tina is the name that is used for methamphetamine. So Tina in Chemsex communities is like the moniker for the most part, but not always, for the most part though. These are obviously very powerful stimulants, and they're useful because they can prevent someone from coming for a long time while also making them feel a lot more rewarded about having sex, have a lot more stamina, and also increase levels of dominance and levels of arousal and confidence. Ow. That's what I get for trying to sit on the piano bench. Ow. So this is like what you would expect from stimulants, basically, right? And now poppers, which I said we weren't going to cover, but I lied because I forgot. This is just kind of a brief note about poppers, is that poppers are amyl or butyl nitrite, and they come in these little like liquid gold or gold rush popper containers, and you pop the top off and inhale them. And they're often marketed as like shoe polish and cleaning supplies or whatever. They're sold all over the place, but they're known to cause a sharp dip in blood pressure and to, sorry, I thought someone was yelling at me. And they're known to relax blood vessels, right? So they increase or they decrease the blood pressure to certain areas, in particular the mouth, the throat, the anus, the vagina, whatever the fuck. Which makes them very useful for sex, especially if you're trying to get into tight and closed spaces. So the problem with this is that combining with Viagra can be super dangerous, and a lot of people don't realize this, and Viagra is obviously probably pretty popular in a lot of gay sex communities because it's really useful for maintaining an erection. Some potential health risks of using poppers are that if you use them chronically too frequently, you actually are at risk of vision problems and temporary decreases in your immune functionality. So this is an important thing to keep in mind during the era of COVID, or as every email in the last 6 months has said, these unprecedented times. So that's poppers. Now there's GHB and GBL. Show of thumbs in the chat. How many of you are familiar with GHB or GBL? Just curious.
GHB.
Okay, cool. A good number, more than I expected.
Both
Cool.
and BDO.
Sorry?
Both of those and BDO.
And B. So there's GHB, GBL, B, and then there are some others that are not quite as popular. So these are actually precursors to GABA and glutamate. So GBL is what's known as a prodrug for GHB. Wow. My old friend George Henry Benson. So GBL is a prodrug for GHB, and a prodrug is a drug that's converted into a different drug in the body. So this means that when you dose GBL, which is a lot easier to get than GHB, it can have a very unpredictable effect. And this is a real double-edged sword because obviously you get it more easily, but when you actually take it into your body, the process of it being converted into GHB varies wildly based on your specific chemical composition for the day, right? So that means that if you're dosing a certain amount of GBL, but your stomach happens to be a little bit emptier or less acidic or whatever than usual, then you could accidentally become way more intoxicated than you mean to on GBL, because that conversion process relies on your hormones and your body composition, etc. Now, generally, GBL is going to have a very strong chemical kind of gross taste. GHB has a little bit of a salty, soapy taste that can be very well disguised in drinks. So this is part of why GHB is known so colloquially as a date rape drug, because since it does have this kind of salty, almost soapy, sweetish profile, you could theoretically spike a drink with it, and someone that was just like, oh, it's alcohol, wouldn't really know. But mixing alcohol with GHB is incredibly dangerous. In fact, yeah, GHB can keep lactic acid from building up in muscles. It was used by bodybuilders. I think I remember seeing that actually. It was used as a performance-enhancing drug. I'm not too familiar with that area of it though. But mixing GHB with alcohol is like potentially fatal. It's really serious. They are very, very heavily synergistic in terms of how highly they depress your central nervous system. And getting what's called G'd out is a state that's pretty easy to reach. It's blacking out, basically. So GHB is an insanely dose-sensitive chemical. You need to measure it in milliliters. You need to be very careful with it. 0.5 milliliters can make the difference between you having a nice night out with your friends and you uncontrollably puking in an alley for like 2 hours or blacking out altogether. So if you're going to be consuming GHB or GBL, do not have any alcohol in your system. We're talking not like don't have any drinks 4 hours prior. We're talking like drinks are out of your system by 4 hours or so before you take GHB or GBL. Otherwise, they compound each other like crazy, and risking that could be very serious. Increases growth hormone. People in the old days used to lift heavy and then take G for the recovery. I didn't know that. High five, DrugsCo. Yes, bring the knowledge on. I love it. So GHB and GBL, generally speaking, share some qualities from alcohol and MDMA. Although, as someone very wisely said to me today, many people just compare their favorite drug to MDMA and say it has qualities of MDMA. What we're saying is that it's a sociable substance that drastically enhances sex for a lot of people. G is, I don't want to say highly addictive because that phrase is so loaded, but the risk of developing, let's say, a neurological affinity for GHB is relatively high comparatively. It's not the kind of, like, no substance for the most part you're going to do one time and be like, I'm hooked forever. If you have, like, environmentally speaking or neurologically speaking, if you're predisposed to an addictive brain, basically, because your reward pathways are already doing that thing, then sure. But GHB is one of those where you should be cautious, definitely, absolutely. It is not like an alcohol replacement for casual ingestion. And alcohol should not be ingested casually either, I might say, but there are different. Yeah, so just keep in mind that being G'd out and blacking out is pretty serious. So if anyone you know is ever trying to do GHB and they've had any alcohol in their system, or they don't have an exact milliliter dosage, probably prevent them from doing it, because you could be taking care of one vomity son of a bitch for the next 6 hours, approximately. Yeah. Then there's mephedrone, which is otherwise known as meow meow, occasionally, although people don't really, it's not a very common street drug at this point in time. It was a couple of years ago. It's like reduced a little bit. So mephedrone is a synthetic cathinone, and we talked about that a little bit ago. That's a dopamine agonist. Oh, wow, that's a terrible story. It's a dopamine agonist, serotonin agonist, norepinephrine agonist. So you can kind of get a feeling for that immediately. It's a euphoric stimulant. Now, in the case of mephedrone, it actually dumps about as much serotonin as MDMA, but twice as much dopamine. It is very common to have pretty gnarly hangovers and headaches from mephedrone. And this, like other stimulants, can cause your blood pressure to spike and your heart rate to spike. It is potentially neurotoxic as well, and it is very risky to combine with HIV medication. And given that we're talking about chemsex, that's a problem, right? Like, a lot of people in chemsex communities are at risk for HIV if they don't practice safe sex. And this is just another thing that can stack onto that as being a potential point of danger. Some of the older G heads will write G on the backs of their hands in case they G out. That way they don't end up with an expensive ambulance ride for something they can sleep off in a few hours. This is great intel. Really good intel. That's good to know. However, the one thing about that is that if someone is really G'd out, and they've just G'd out and they're blacked out because of that, and they're just like passed out for a while, someone needs to be monitoring their heart rate and breathing the entire time. They cannot be left alone, because that is a high risk of vomiting in your mouth and choking on it and dying, which happens. Yeah, so overdose can happen pretty easily with something like methadone from not being able to metabolize it as correctly if you're on HIV medications. Now, some risks of chemsex include, obviously, addiction and dependence, and many of the substances that we've just talked about hold a higher risk than other substances in this context because of the amount of social and oppression-based pressure that comes into using these kinds of drugs for creating or being a part of problematic relationships with them. Additionally, this can make people feel much more willing to engage in riskier sex, and in some cases agree to things that they wouldn't otherwise. And as well, since many of them are stimulants, this can lead people to just not sleep for really long periods of time, sometimes 72 hours or more. And this just leads to a cascade of effects, right? So in the chemsex community, we have this issue where marginalized groups already facing issues, utilizing chemsex both as a way of building community and enhancing the sexual experience. There's increased access to substances. There is possibly less access to resources surrounding those substances and safe sex and safe drug use. And because of this, there's a health crisis that comes into this, where people are just more at risk for other health problems, and it is all rooted in the fact that they're marginalized in the first place. Always is the case, isn't it? That's crazy. It's almost like marginalization is the root of like all evil. So the other thing is that consent is hindered here. It creates a really serious gray area for a lot of these things. Additionally, like I said, people are more willing to engage in riskier sex, and things like GHB are very, very dangerous to combine with alcohol and HIV medications. So if someone doesn't know this, then they might go into what they think is just like a regular sesh and come out having really serious possible health consequences. Just for some fun terminology, because we're going over global issues right now, slamming meth and also methadone, that's injecting meth or methadone, is like a big thing that's happening right now in Europe. And this is like, it's a pretty intense practice. If you're curious about this photo series, which is really wild, you should check it out in the comments or in the presenter notes here. So part of the like social issue here is that being under the influence of stimulants while in this like very intense, very sensual, very sexual environment can make intimacy feel a little bit frenzied, and also mean that as the high fades, the sense of emotional connection fades. And for many people, this ends up being a really reinforcing part of the cycle, which makes people more at risk for developing problematic relationships with these drugs, right? But it also means that chemsex communities and gay men in general might struggle more with feeling isolated as they have this high that they ride during the experience, and then when they come down, it's kind of a return to like, okay, blinds off, we're going elsewhere. Now let's dive into punk real quick. Some of you might be familiar with images like this. Punks are in some cases known for huffing glue, specifically model airplane glue and contact cement. In fact, there was actually a zine published about it starting in, I think it was 76, 77, maybe it was a little bit later actually, or earlier. And that was like named because people were so concerned with punks sniffing glue. The fact of the matter is that not that many punks actually sniffed glue, but it fit with the aesthetic of being anti-establishment and was so shocking that parents freaked out about it, basically. So there was even music that was made about it, like Sniffing Glue Blues is one of these songs. So it wasn't that huge of a practice, but it was just like a thing that punks became known for, was huffing glue because it was so shocking. Then there's Rasta. There's Jah, which is the god that this religion centers around. We're not going to go far into this. We're just going to talk about the aspect of these communities that are publicly known in pop culture as being drug related. They're obviously much more complicated than this. This particular religion emphasized natural lifestyles, dreadlocks, traditional gender roles. Bob Marley was obviously one of the pioneers of spreading this movement and making it more well known. And it was initially in Jamaica in the 30s, then became a counterculture movement, or part of the counterculture movement in the 50s. And then in the 80s, it kind of lost a little bit of steam after Bob Marley passed away. So,
Ethiopian churches.
Actually, one second. Let me fast forward here. Get an idea for this.
Now, another common thing that's well known about Rastafari is the use of marijuana or cannabis within the group. And actually, this is a very important part of the ritual side of the Rastafari movement, as they believe that it brings people closer to God, to Jah, but also that it makes people self-reflect more. And this they see as a good thing, as it's a natural thing. Now, at groundings, which are Rastafari ceremonies, essentially lots of people get together, or a group of people get together and do chanting and drumming and pass around a doobie or a spliff or whatever you want to call it, and they smoke the ganja together, which is also the Jamaican term for weed or marijuana. I mean, I know way too many of these terms, but it's a Dutch thing, so I assure you it's all fine. But actually, surprisingly to some, weed isn't actually legal in Jamaica. And this has put Raini Rastafari, as well as in the diaspora, wherever they are in the world, in conflict with the law, and often gives them a bad reputation, because they are the ones who are going and smoking marijuana, even when it's illegal, because they claim that it's an important part of their religious practice.
There's a whole video on this if you're curious about the entire thing. But yeah, weed is known as like the main religious component of Rasta religion. And these grounding ceremonies were male exclusive, and they involved smoking a spliff or a joint or whatever after reciting a prayer, and they're kind of like social and spiritual gatherings. Now, this one, many of you might be very curious about, scopolamine. This is also known as devil's breath, and scopolamine is actually one of the primary psychoactive components of datura as well. So this is not just a compound that occurs in these seeds in Colombia, but is also found naturally occurring in other substances too. Now, scopolamine is a prescription drug that is an anti-nausea medication that is part of, or extracted from a tree that's native to South America. But when it's taken at higher doses, it can cause a whole range of completely alternate effects. There's a lot of misinformation out there about scopolamine. There's a lot of uncertainty out there about scopolamine, but one thing is certain, which is that it is a deliriant, and deliriants can indeed be used. People should stop passing weed around during COVID. Yes, I have news about this. If you are smoking anything or vaping anything right now, not only do you not have your mask on, but also your particles could be carrying 3 to 5 times as far as they would normally, which means that if you're smoking or vaping around someone else, even if they're like 20 feet away, they could still actually be at risk if you're asymptomatic. So if you're smoking or vaping, right, this is like CDC confirmed. If you're smoking or vaping right now, you have a responsibility to move far away from other people. Be mindful of that, even if you're ventilated. Anyway, so scopolamine can cause all kinds of complications because it's a deliriant, memory loss, inhibition, hallucinations, and sometimes loss of consciousness or even overdose death.
No tienes igual, ¿me entiendes? Tú puedes, con un sopilado así, por ejemplo, tú estás, vas de espalda, como una pita caminando acá, y yo me paso por aquí. Así nomás con eso, nomás con eso. Como a medio tarde, entonces ya tú, no, ya tú eres dueño total del mal. Lo coges, lo encaras y te lo llevas para donde tú quieras, parece un niño.
y tú te llevas, llévame a tu casa, saca tu dame tus cuentas de ahorros, tu número de tu tarjeta y tal. Si te pasas de dosis, corre peligro de que la persona se muera.
Colombia is basically fucked. They're the longest running guerrilla war in all of Latin America. They've essentially been at civil war for 60 years, and really, if you think about it, they've never not been at war since they gained their own independence. Other fun facts about Colombia, definitely not from the Board of Tourism, include the fact that 1 in every 3 kidnappings in the world happen right here in Colombia. And as we all know, it's the cocaine capital of the universe.
Un gramo de Scopola es como un gramo de perico, la misma maricada, porque tiene la misma densidad en peso y en presentación. ¿Me entiendes cómo es? Con un gramo puedes matar hasta 10, 15 personas más. Por eso es tan extremadamente delicado y no se consigue. Y la información, por ejemplo, que yo sí sé dónde se consigue, porque yo sí sé, güey, puta, dónde se consigue todo.
Now, the borrachero tree, which, by the way, roughly translates to drunken binge tree, is indigenous to the northern Andean region. That includes Colombia and Ecuador, Venezuela. But the scopolamine is really only used by the criminal element here in Colombia.
Que por aquí tiene que haber una número si de pronto pillamos una. ¿No viste que ahí al lado de César hay una? Sí, al lado de César hay un árbol. Ahí que dice silvestre.
So despite the insane homicide rates, the kidnapping, the narco-trafficking, the civil unrest, and everything else going on in here in Colombia, we can't seem to find a Colombian who's more scared of anything than falling asleep under the borrachero tree.
That's Datura for you. Okay. So let's bust some myths. So, as with pretty much any drug that's been declared to be a zombie drug, you're not going to turn into a zombie from scopolamine. It's not going to happen. Like, you might have an episode where you are not in touch with reality, psychosis or not, depending on the dose. You might go unconscious depending on the dose. You might have health complications. You might become suggestible, but it's not as simple as the guy in the video said. It's not like you become immediately like, oh, I'll do whatever you want. This was actually a drug that was used by the US government as part of the hunt for the Manchurian candidate. And obviously it didn't work that well, because otherwise we would be using it in criminal warfare a lot more often. I'm sure that we do, but it's not as simple as mind control drug. However, it can absolutely cause very, very potent, potentially life-threateningly intense hallucinations and detachment from reality. There's another rumor going around that scopolamine can be administered via business cards, and that if you're in a country where scopolamine is prevalent, and like, this is not fear-mongering, because that guy in the Vice video was like, oh, scopolamine's fucked, or I mean, Colombia's fucked, like, oh, so many bad things the Board of Tourism won't tell you. Colombia is just another country doing its thing, you know, like, that kind of language, while like it is intended to portray how serious the problem of narco trafficking is in an unregulated state, is also honestly intensely demeaning to Colombia, which is just a country that has been fucked over by other countries and colonialism and racism and poverty like any other country is dealing with. Like, absolutely, there are things that happen in Colombia that don't happen elsewhere, but that's the case with everywhere. So just keep that in mind and be careful whenever you see a video that uses that kind of loaded language, because it is kind of insulting. Like, there are facts there, but it's insulting. So one of the fear-based rumors that spread about scopolamine is that you can actually be dosed with it through business cards. In the vast majority of cases, you can't be dosed through your skin with most, if not all, okay, I'm going to say most substances, including fentanyl. You can't be dosed through your skin unless it's a patch. Your skin is a membrane. It is very good at keeping shit out. The whole point of it, in fact, literally the entire point of it, is to keep shit out. So if it were as easy as like being handed a business card and getting high, then damn, the world would be a different ass place. But don't believe the hype. You would need to have like a high, consistent dose of scopolamine on your skin through some absorbable form for you to get high from it. And then there's Datura, which is this, which I'm sure many of you have seen in the past. It grows all over the United States and elsewhere, and scopolamine is one of the main components of it, right? All right, I'm going to talk about street kids now. They look like hell's bells. Yes, that is what they're also known as hell's bells. Datura, Jimson weed, hell's bells. Those are 3 names for Datura. So glue is a really underestimated issue globally right now, with particularly children. It is a very, very popular substance among children. In Myanmar, in India, Ethiopia, Somalia, Brazil, what's behind that? Morocco, Nepal, Romania, Turkey, Kenya, Mexico, Romania, again, Thailand, Bangladesh, Philippines, Pakistan. Street children in general are extremely susceptible to using or huffing, basically. Inhalants are most popular, generally speaking, among kids because they're easy to access, but also for other reasons that we're going to get into for a second. In the Philippines, glue is known as rugby. In Pakistan is known as, or one of the brands is Samad Bond. There's Activo in Mexico. There's Arolac in Romania. These are just different brands of the most popular kinds of glue. Now, toluene is a kind of solvent that is found, I think, in glue primarily, I don't remember. It lasts approximately 1 to 2 minutes, and it can come with a really strong head rush and numbness in the extremities and hallucinations, confidence, euphoria. In terms of long-term damage, the kids in particular that use things like toluene and other solvents, which are things that can be puffed basically, involve like intense fatigue, loss of coordination, including with speech, memory issues, cognitive difficulties, and deficiencies. There's a reason that it's kids though. A rag picker is a term for a kid that sifts through trash to find things that they can sell. Now, most of the time, it's meant to be toluene. It might be. It might be. I'll have to check on that. Can you message me or email me and remind me to check on that? Thank you. So this is the root of most things, right? It is poverty and hunger and domestic violence. And if we're looking at things that are used for the purposes of escapism, glue is way up there. I need to look at this right now, though. I need to know. Oh my God. You caught me. I'm an idiot. I spelled it wrong in all these slides. Ooh, okay, called out. Called out, thank you. So this is a substance, a solvent that keeps hunger at bay is a major thing. This is a hunger suppressant. It helps kids sleep because it's a depressant in many ways. And it also brings them distance from the discomfort of their daily lives. Now, often these three things, poverty, hunger, and domestic violence, go together. There is a just enormous and deeply upsetting amount of abuse that comes with being a street child in the world in general. Toluene is a chemical, often comes from hydrocarbon extraction, such as oil drilling used to make benzene, fuel additives, and solvents. Thank you. There is a documentary called Children Underground that I don't think I have access to anymore, but if you get the opportunity to, it follows a bunch of kids in the, I think, Romanian subway system. No, I think they're in Ukraine, the subway system, who live in the subway system and beg for money to buy glue, basically. Oops. Oh no, it's doing that thing. Oh, fuck. God damn it.
Nicholas Chaban is addicted to glue. His body reeks of the gasoline-like substance. Sniffing glue has left him struggling to understand a simple conversation or form a coherent sentence.
I want to stop. It makes me feel very sleepy, and it really torments me.
Nicholas Chaban lives on the streets of Nairobi, along with tens of thousands of other children and youths. The government estimates there are 50,000 street children in Nairobi and 300,000 in the country at large. Nancy Wamweya is Program Assistant Director at the Ndugu Society, a group that rehabilitates street children. She estimates that anywhere from 52 to 90% of the children who live on the street may be addicted to glue. The consequences, she says, are devastating.
When children sniff glue, you realize that most of them get hallucinations, delusions, they stop eating, they lose weight, some eventually die. Actually, one of the things that was found out is that it can also cause sudden death.
The glue sold on the street is used in shoe repair, upholstery, and other activities. Retailers purchase glue from manufacturers. In turn, some retailers sell the glue to women known as Mama Pima, who in turn sell to children, some of whom are as young as 5 years old. 24-year-old Bernadette Wangui is one such Mama Pima. She sells glue to an average of 30 children a day. The mother of two, who herself lives on the streets, sells the glue for 10 shillings, or about 7 US cents a hit. Wangui says she knows that the glue makes the children, in her words, go mad.
It is not our wish to sell glue. We are just selling it to get food for our children. We would like some help.
The Society released a study in October on glue and other substance abuse by Nairobi street children. The report says street children sniff glue mostly because of peer pressure, to feel good from the high, to stay warm, and to ward off hunger pains.
This is not limited to Nairobi, right? Like, this is in Brazil, this is in other regions in Africa, this is in all of the countries previously mentioned, this is in the United States, this is everywhere. This is also a photo series on kids in Brazil with glue. Now moving on to Ukraine, there's Bomzhi and Baltushka. Bomzhi is the name for child street games in Ukraine, specifically in this region. You can already see in their hands what they have. Baltushka is a mixture of pseudoephedrine, which is cold medicines, cough medicine, potassium, I always say permanganate, like in that Pregnart video, permanganate, vinegar, and water. Now, this name means mixy or fizzy because you have to swirl it and mix it and make it fizz in a particular way. Now, this is notable because generally speaking, and I should really remove the phrase harder drugs because I'm past that since 2018, but generally speaking, street children do not typically use substances like meth, like heroin, that are often used as injection or smokable substances, partly because the practice of injecting or smoking it requires so much more preparation and knowledge and tools to do, and partly because these substances are harder for children to obtain, like people are not as likely to sell them to kids. So this is notable because this is not a typical occurrence, but this particular Bomzhi, this particular kind of street gang, is unique in this way. Here is big fat graphic warning for this one. This is one that, yeah, be mindful of your own limits here. This is following the story of Bomzhi, of the street gang. Effect is the name for the pseudoephedrine.
Еще раз кто-то крикнет, до того будет 40, на 27 меньше. Ебать, бутылку дались.
Похую давай.
Похую? Похую? Хочешь, чтобы труханула без базара? Что это делал? Она не нашла фильм.
They're currently crushing up the pseudoephedrine
Балдушка это
pills.
психотропное вещество. Изготовляется она, туда надо таблетки. Они предназначены вообще от кашля, но мы их делаем из нее психотропные вещества. Делается она вот так. Засыпает сам организм. Катаются таблетки, а таблетки это называется эффект в капсулах. Или колдакт, или трафик, или трафун. Берем мы их, перекатываем в порошок. Засыпаем туда марганец. 6 кубов. Берем 5-кубовый шприц, выбираем 5 кубов уксуса и 24 куба воды. Потом мы это келешуем шприцом, наматываем, чтобы был коричневый цвет. Когда коричневый цвет становится, мы берем, наматываем на иголку выборку, чуть-чуть загинаем иголку, наматываем туда выборку, ватку, шарик. Потом берем на шприц, одеваем и выбираем стакан, а потом по вене пропускаем себе и режим отлавливаемся.
Тихо, пацаны.
So this is Baltushka with syringes. This is the location. Now, I'm sure that some of you have already heard of Krokodil. In fact, I'm curious, actually, how many of you have heard of Krokodil? Show me by thumbs. Whoops. Okay, some of you. Krokodil made headlines a couple of years ago, as did so many drugs, as being the flesh-eating drug of Ukraine. It is made by mixing a combination of codeine, paint thinner, and gasoline, which is combined to make desomorphine. And desomorphine is like not in and of itself, it's just another opioid, but the fact that it is used, or the fact that it is created with ingredients such as paint thinner and gasoline, make it particularly dangerous to inject and also just to consume in general. So in a lot of cases, these substances, especially opioid derivatives, by themselves, if they're created in a synthesized or in a legal and regulated fashion, they're not as dangerous to consume as directed, you know, like within reason. But mixing with these other ingredients is what really causes problems.
Сколько ты так выглядишь? Ну вот с ноября 2014 уже 1,5 года получается.
А ты лежишь дома, ты употребляешь?
Нет. Ну, бывало это поначалу. Мне даже сны снились, это очень, чуть ли не каждую ночь. Тут уже просто деваться некуда. Уже никуда не забежишь. Только таким способом перестала. Таблетки, бензин, йод. Вся вот эта дрянь. Плюс еще добавляли капли эти топикамид. Глазные капли, они усиливали эффект. Все очень долго героином кололись. Крокодилом почему стали колоться? Потому что не стало героина хорошего. Если был, то очень дорогой и плохого качества. А крокодилом таблетки были дешевые. Тело у меня разрушился тазобедренный сустав. Делали операцию, удалили сустав. Все. И вот у меня еще в коленке нога атрофировалась. Нога стала короче на 5-7 сантиметров позвоночника. Я не сломала позвоночник. Просила постоянно деньги у родителей. Выводила их из себя. И папа мне постоянно пауком в одно и то же место. Из-за этого, то есть получилось так, что он мне получил, ну, что перелом случился. И вот в октябре 2014, в ноябре 2014 мне отказали ноги.
So Krokodil is the result of not having a successfully regulated access to other supply. The abscesses and the problems that are caused by Krokodil aren't necessarily, like I said, because of the opioid itself, but because of the fact that people are forced to use it in these conditions. Because people that would otherwise be using regular heroin are instead creating their own with eye drops and gasoline and paint thinner. And this is what causes this necrotic tissue at the site, this dead tissue basically. It often involves flesh-eating bacteria. That is a real thing, flesh-eating bacteria from improper injection techniques and a lack of access to clean supply. Now, oh man, we're not gonna have time for everything, bummer. So now looking at Africa, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe, we're going to take a look at codeine or cough syrup, which I'm sure many of you have taken at some point in the past. But basically, there are a lot of corrupt pharmaceutical agencies that knowingly sell cough syrup that is going to be consumed recreationally in large quantities.
So many people are drinking. Everything here
It's literally just lean.
is down. We've got a generation to lose if the government does not step up. This one makes us feel better. Seriously better. Police are come after we, but
Whoops.
police are come after we, but we don't give a damn about them. If they come, we wanna give them 2 bags, they go back.
Streets of Harare are full of brown cough syrup bottles, a sign of the addiction epidemic currently ravaging the country, particularly affecting young people.
You can have the shit. I ain't got no messy. I'm so bootless. I'm a villain. On it. I'm a 2016, we started drinking promptly. So per day I could take something like 4 bottles at 400 mils. I wasn't myself. I was someone else or something else.
Cough syrup, often of the brand Clear, contains codeine, an opiate that can be used as a painkiller. It's relatively harmless in small doses and can be highly addictive. Clear also contains alcohol, so when you drink a lot of it, it will make you feel both drunk and high. In large quantities, it can lead to respiratory problems, dangerously low blood pressure, and permanent damage to the brain, heart, and liver.
I did it because of my friends. They were like, if you don't do this, I won't play with you. When you start doing it, afterwards you think it's a better way of life. My mother is a widow. Then she doesn't go to work. Some of the times when you get peace jobs, you have to go and get some money and bring it home to buy some food.
This is my house. I stay there with my 5 children. My mother of 5. With my son, unfortunately, we didn't pick it up because he was in boarding school. My son, he's the quiet type. We couldn't really notice a change in him until last year. You know, he would come home, he would be on that couch, he's holding a plate in his hand, and you're speaking to him and he's not responding. That is what Clear does.
It's a really interesting Vice doc. I highly recommend watching it. We do not have time to, but there's a lot of corruption in the pharmaceutical industry in Zimbabwe and Nigeria that is contributing to this. Also found in Africa is wunga, which is not that common, but it's a mixture of HIV and AIDS medications, heroin, and fillers or bunkers, primarily rat poison, as being one of the major ones. one of the issues that is being faced with Wunga is the fact that people that need their HIV and AIDS medications have actually had their houses broken into so people can steal it, as well as people that need opioid medication as well. So here's part of the process of creating Wunga. I guess that's all we're saying on that. It's really not, like, Wunga is not that prevalent, but it is definitely something that we're seeing more of. And then in Southeast Asia, there's Yaba or Shabu. And this is predominantly produced in, oh my God, I don't want to say this wrong, hang on. It's Myanmar. I think that's Myanmar. Yeah, it's Myanmar. That is brought to Thailand via truckers and then imported to Malaysia. And Yaba or Shabu is a mixture of meth and caffeine, and it's pressed into pills like this. So Thailand exports to both Malaysia and the Philippines from here. Thank you, Danita. I'm so proud of you for knowing this fact. Myanmar. So one of the Business of Drugs episodes apparently is all about Yaba. I haven't looked at these slides in a little bit long, so I didn't want to say that wrong. But yeah, this is how you can kind of skirt exporting regulations, is that you bring them over by trucks and then export from countries that are less concerned with regulation. Let's take a look at the Thai meth epidemic and vomit rehab.
Hey, it's Emerson from Vice's Brooklyn.
Love Yaba.
มีหลายสี
Oh, it smells very sweet. Smoking? Okay.
เรากระดาษ
Does everybody smoke it?
ใช่ yes
Yeah?
มีกินมีใช้กินก็มีก็เพื่อนๆแล้วก็เขาจริงๆเขาทำกันแบบนี้ทุกคนอันนี้เราต้องสูบต้องสโมกเข้าไป
Facing the dragon.
หลอดสูบ
Oh, looks very legit. Like, he totally knows what he's doing.
Okay, DrugsCo. So that's the end of our class. And under normal circumstances, there'd be one more to kind of unpack and go over everything. Yeah, I'm sorry. Kind of unpack and go over everything. And for me to make some grand speech about how there's a quote from someone, I forget who it is, that says, something about how the most change that is enacted is by a passionate individual, and indeed it's the only thing that ever changes things. So having stuck with me for, Jesus, a lot of months, 3.5 months of DrugsCo, I just want everyone who's here to recognize that this entire practice is a ripple effect, and that there is not education on this subject that is reputable, that is reliable. And Shark, did you just pull the quote? A small group of dedicated individuals indeed is the only thing that ever has. Yeah. I just want you all to be aware of the fact that you having the knowledge that you have now means that you are capable of teaching people things that they would never have known otherwise. You are capable of very literally saving people's lives, like very literally. And if there's anything that I can impress upon you, it's to remember that everything that we think we know now is subject to change, and that everything that you know needs to be subject to criticism. If you impart this information upon other people, you need to be prepared to be told at some point, you're wrong, you misremembered, that's incorrect, you spelled Halloween wrong, you pronounced it wrong. I don't know, I've been using the word, I forget which one Shark called me out on, but I've been using it wrong. But anyway, you all are in a position right now to do real shit with this information. This is no joke. This is the kind of thing that could actually very easily change the course of your community or your life or the lives of others. Being able to recognize opioid overdose, knowing how to handle it if someone is unconscious, knowing what to look for in terms of overdose, knowing whether or not a mixture is dangerous, knowing whether or not someone's life is at risk or their psyche is at risk because of a drug that they've taken. All of these things mean that you are one of the most valuable people in your communities right now. So keep this up. Keep the conversation going. Follow Dance Safe if you're curious. And if you want to be added to our DrugsCo Discord or Facebook Messenger chat, let me know. They haven't been active yet because I've been so busy, but I will be signal boosting things in there. And I just hope that all of you realize how important it is that you've taken the time to spend 3.5 months where you could have been doing literally anything else with your time, learning about drugs. And I commend you, and I am honored that you've all stuck with me through this. And I hope to see you all soon. So thank you for the first ever all online version of DrugsCo. Remember drugsexco.weebly.com, and keep in touch, okay? Bye.